Thanks, Vicki. Good morning, everyone. I'm in Maryland, and so as I was getting ready to fly down to meet with you yesterday afternoon, I was in front of the mirror, combing what's left of my hair or something, and I said to my wife, honey, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think that I would be asked to come and talk to a national meeting of the National Association of Court Managers? Without blinking her eye, my blushing bride looked at me and said, Sugar, my wildest dreams have nothing to do with either you or court managers. Is this on? You guys can hear me, right? All right. It's people stand up here and say it's an honor, it's a thrill, all that stuff, right? But it actually is today for me because I have some history with this organization. After I worked at the drug court office at Justice, I went and worked for a while at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, giving away money. And if you ever get a job where you get to give away money, you immediately become incredibly handsome, funny beyond belief, and the smartest guy in the world. Those are all characteristics that mysteriously dissipate when you no longer give money away. But when you give money away, you can do no wrong. And while in those days, I was in charge of giving away all of BJA's discretionary money, and to show you how long ago that was, I think we had an annual discretionary budget of $90+ million, right? That was just money to invest in various ideas and schemes and things. And while in that position, a good friend of mine, Barry Mahoney, brought a young man with him by the name of Bob Wessels. And Barry and Bob made an impassioned pitch that the Justice Department should help out this organization called NACM. What the heck's NACM? It's the National Association of Court Managers. Why should the United States government support yet another organization of court professionals? The list of court professional organizations is longer than my arm. Love you, Barry. This guy Wessel seems to be okay, but really, let's move on. And Bob convinced me when he made the compelling argument that this organization is an organization about getting things done, that this is an organization that is focused on action, that the members of this organization not only take their work seriously, but represent the unheralded leaders of innovation, efficiency, and reform. That remains the case to this day. And for that, I applaud you and thank you. So we're going to talk about bail. And we're going to turn on our microphone to do that. Awesome. So I've done this most of my life, and it's getting to be an astonishingly long life. And when people talk to you guys about bail reform historically, we're talking about a couple of poor people that get chewed up in the system. You know, the mechanisms we have in place are particularly unfair to a few, and you should change it. And that dialogue has changed dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. This stuff is really broken. It is broken on all levels. It is broken. It is dangerous. Hi, Scott. How are you? Thanks for having me, by the way. Didn't see you there. It is broken. It is dangerous. It is prohibitively costly. And more remarkable than any of that stuff, the movement to change it has coalesced partnerships with the most unlikely of allies. And so I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so with you guys talking about the various costs that are incurred by the current system, some thoughts towards reforming them, and then a discussion about who's on board and why reform is important to each and every one of you in your jurisdictions and to this organization. So we've got almost universal perceptions of this stuff, right? Crime has a price. They don't arrest you for nothing, right? Most of the time, when you get arrested, ladies and gentlemen, you've done something wrong. Most of the time. Most of the time. Do something wrong, pay a price. Bail fits very nicely, right? What price shall we exact? First one, bond. Get charged with something little bit of bond. Charged with something bigger bond. All makes sense. Were my mother still alive and I explained to her how it worked, honestly, she would say, yeah, that makes sense. Because historically in this country, the way we process this segment of justice administration is based on the punishment associated with the crime you're accused of. Right? I'm charged with shoplifting, little bit of punishment, little bit of bail. Doesn't matter who I am. It's all focused on the crime. I'm charged with something really serious, with a very heavy penalty, then that's going to cost me a lot of money. Why is that? Well, our theory is I'm probably not going to run away on the shoplifting case to avoid the little bit of punishment you're going to dole out to me. But the temptation for me to run away for the big heavy penalty you're going to hit me over the head with is probably far greater. And as a result, we need more skin in the game, as we love to say. Right? Makes sense on the face of it. Current system is sensible in that I'm rewarded as the criminal defendant if I behave in the ways you want me to. You put up money, money comes back to you. It all makes sense on its face. We need jails. We use jails to protect us from those who are really scary and to punish those with whom the court feels a jail sanction is appropriate. We have stakeholders in our public institutions that have discretion. We vest that discretion with them as part of their positions. And that discretion, guided by intuition, is usually pretty solid stuff, right? Decision makers who use the eyeball don't need to be confused by anything else. That's why I have this job. That's why I got elected. I've been doing this for 30 years, all that stuff. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will, throughout my time with you, draw a big, bright line between discretion and intuition. So what's the purpose of the bail decision? In 46 states, the purpose of bail is twofold. What's it going to take to get me back to court? What's it going to take to keep me out of trouble? In 4 states, It's only by law. What's it going to take to bring me back to court? Danger, public safety are not legally authorized considerations in 4 states. Used to be every state, but there was a case we'll talk about that changed that in the 1980s. Maintain the integrity of the judicial process, protect victims, witnesses, and the community. There's a third purpose, though, isn't there? We don't normally talk about it. Bail is actually a protection for the accused. Bail is a form of release, not detention. Think back to the political climate that gave birth to the Magna Carta. Bail is one of those fundamental rights, you guys, that is shrouded in the idea that the state doesn't have the right to show up at my door for no good reason, knock it down, and take my stuff, including me. The state's powers are regulated transparently, and I have rights that the state cannot trample. And one of those rights is, as we all know, the presumption of innocence. Even though I'm probably guilty, there are due processes. The state has to make the case, blah, 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 blah. Bail is my avenue for securing release. And when bail is set, it is to get me back to court and to keep me out of trouble. Anybody here from Maryland? Whereabouts?
Silver Spring.
Huh? Welcome. Silver Spring as well? Montgomery County. My home state of Maryland last year was the unfortunate site of what we euphemistically call civil unrest. The town was burning down. Riots in the street. Young man had been shot and killed by law enforcement. In this era of # hash marks, there was a video taken on a phone of a young man who smashes the windshield of a police cruiser. And I'm going to use a technical term. You guys are just going to have to limp along with me. The video goes viral. Okay? My kids would tell you that means everybody gets to see it, right? So here's a video all over the world of this kid smashing a windshield, right? The next day, the kid, along with his mother and his pastor, the kid, his Cub Scout leader, whoever, he got all the right people together, just as any of us would. And he went to the police station and he turned himself in. Purpose of bail: keep me out of trouble, get my butt to court. Okay, well, that second purpose you think wouldn't be of serious concern if you turn yourself in. Right? So much for fugitivity. The kid has no adult criminal history. He did have some juvenile involvements. He was charged with destruction of public property valued at $2,500 or less. How much was his bail? Anybody? Give me a number, guys. Hold it, I'm an old man. Not so fast, oh my gosh. All right. Yes, young woman. 500? No. He was charged with destruction of property valued at under $2,500. 5,000 would be a little over the top, don't you? 2,500. 500,000. Anything else? Come on, guys. 10,000. Thank you, Marcy. Anybody else? None. Who said none? Why none? Why none? released on his own recognizance. So here we are, right? This is how crazy this stuff is. This is how crazy it is. We're all professionals, right? We all take our work really seriously, and based on where we work and the values and the norms and the practices, we're guessing bail from anything that includes $500,000 bond, no bond. 500,000 is no bond, ain't it? Right? To release on my promise to come back to court. And so you have to step back and think about all of this stuff in the context of the purpose of bail. His bail, by the way, was $1 million. Four law enforcement officers charged with killing the young man, and the state attorney actually filed charges within 72 hours against law enforcement. Got $250,000. $1 million bond for breaking a windshield. 1/4 of that for taking a life. Allegedly, right? And so I would proffer to you that bail doesn't just serve the purpose of getting me back to court and keeping me out of trouble. It does a whole bunch of other stuff. And it does a whole bunch of other stuff in almost every jurisdiction represented in this room that it's not supposed to do. In the case of the young man in Baltimore, it sent a message. We're not tolerating that kind of behavior, right? It is incapacitating people beyond any imaginable opportunity for them to meet the conditions of release set by the court. It draws a line in the sand. It tells the community, we're on the job, we got this. All of those are wonderful, political, pragmatic, and legally inappropriate purposes of bail. And because those purposes drive decision-making and support the culture in each of our courts, we get some really wacky outcomes. So let's look at some of the case law that guides this stuff. The first case that the Supreme Court ever looked at that had any significance with regard to bail is Stack v. Boyle. It was terrorists, interestingly enough, in this political and pragmatic climate. A bunch of individuals got together and plotted to blow up the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. They got arrested. They came before the court. The court said, you guys are all charged with the same thing. You get the same bail. The matter was taken up to the Supremes and the Supreme Court, and it was brought up to the Supreme Court on a number of issues other than bail, in addition to bail. It said, whoa. You can't set the bail based on the offense. How does that answer the purposes of bail? You have to set bail based on the alleged offender. Really? Shows you how much attention people pay to the Supreme Court. Anybody here have bail schedules? Hello, pick up, right? Bail must be based on what does it take to get me back to court. I'm not going to keep going to the kid in Baltimore with $1 million bond, but seriously? Does that have any connection with bringing that kid back to court? This is before danger was a legally appropriate consideration, and the bail decision must be individualized to each defendant. In other words, you can't have bail schedules. based on offenses. Bail schedules were developed as an effort to help people secure release as early as possible. I get it. It's a well-intentioned idea that is disastrous in its outcome and in contradiction to the law of the land. Next big Supreme Court case is in the 80s, and it's Salerno. So D.C., Washington, D.C., had just gotten home rule. I was working there at the time as a small child. And Congress passes what is called preventive detention, because D.C. was using a lot of release on recognizance, and it scared the crap out of Congress. These people are just getting out? Are you kidding me? We need some way to incapacitate these thugs and predators. Right? Well-intentioned stuff. Well-intentioned stuff. So they passed legislation that applied only to the District of Columbia, not to the U.S. federal courts. And that legislation authorized the prosecutor, which is the U.S. attorney in D.C., to move to have someone detained without any opportunity for bail in crimes that are less than capital life felonies, based on the holding that, or the position of the state, that there's no condition or combination of conditions that can reasonably assure the appearance of the accused or maintain community safety. When the government moves for that detention, that triggers a hearing. The court looks at the strength of the case and determines whether or not there are any conditions that will meet the requirements of the law. Salerno was an organized crime guy. I was actually in the courtroom when Salerno was detained. It was a very carefully selected case by the state, as it should be. It goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, danger is an appropriate consideration. Danger had always been a consideration, always. I'm charged with something scary. You can only consider flight. What do? You set $1 million bond and say, I think Tim's going to run away. Right? So danger, what they were really saying was, Tim scares the crap out of me. I want him in the jail. And so we camouflage it or distort it as a decision based only on flight. Rehnquist is the Chief Justice. I'm sorry, I have to say this. It's my favorite line of any public speaking. Bill Rehnquist, not exactly a bong-toting hippie, says in the majority opinion, liberty's the norm in detention prior to trial is the carefully guarded exception. I don't know where Bill works, but it ain't anywhere I ever worked. Because our jails are literally full of the carefully guarded exception. Because the mechanisms we have in place, employed by well-intentioned, sincere individuals who believe to their toes they're doing the best job that can be done, results in the incapacitation of those who can't raise cash and the unfettered release of those who can, regardless of how scary or dangerous they are. So we know that arrests are down over the last 20-some years. We know 30-some years. And we know that bookings in jail are up. More of those who are arrested are taken into custody than was the case in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. We also know that crime rates, violent crime. You guys see that? I'm not saying there is no violent crime. There's tons of it. But it has been static your whole professional lives. I'll really scare you. It's been static my entire professional life, and I've been working for 200 years. I'm not saying we ignore it. It's real stuff, right? But there's no unmanageable spike of violent crime. As a matter of fact, there's not even much of a discernible blip in violent crime. Property crime has gone down significantly, and these data only go to 2012, so those who want to argue it's going back up, God bless you, knock yourself out. And then the blue lines show us the numbers who are in jail. And so you can see there is no rational correlation in how we use jail to respond to crime. Over the last 30 years, we have seen an erosion of pretrial liberty and a rather massive, nationally, increase in pretrial detention. That isn't triggered by crime. It's not a response to our streets are burning. Quick, let's fix things. And almost all of that increase are pretrial defendants. So you guys, we live in a country that I'm very proud of. You no less so. But while you're in Mobile at a national conference listening to some crazy old man walk up and down the aisles, consider this. Despite everything that we've learned, despite my favorite subject in school, 9th grade civics, that taught me the sacred principles upon which all the systems you guys work in and that I work in are heads and shoulders above anything anyone ever invented prior to this. For those in jail, pre-trial, you sit in jail while you're presumed innocent, and once you're convicted, because you probably will be, we send you home. What is the most used disposition in criminal courts? Absolutely. And what's that mean? That means you punish me while I'm innocent, and you say, geez, Tim, you're so freaking scary. I need something from you you ain't got, while you're presumed innocent. And then the minute you give me the chance to stand in front of you and raise my hand and say, I did it, because I almost always do, I go, okay, great. You're not so scary, go home. So when we talk about purposes of bail, let's talk about one nobody ever talks about out loud. We use bail to manage dockets. We use bail to manage caseloads. I don't care if you're a judge, a prosecutor, or defender. You count on bail to help move the volume of work you have to address. You know, when they bring me up from jail, if in fact they do on the day I'm supposed to be there, because I've worked in many places where they don't, chained side by side, and a jumpsuit that is not going to bring out the best of my blue eyes or my complexion. And they say, Timbo. I go, did it. Okay, good. Unchain him, send him to property, get his stuff, get him out of here. Right? Since 1990, jail increases total about 84%. The number of unconvicted people in jail increased by 126%. This is, the people in jail in America are presumed innocent, probably guilty, pretrial defendants. That's what we're using jails for. Look at your jail. I know you work in court. Jail's a pain in your butt. I get it. Take a look. 60%, 70%, 80, 85%. The national average is between 60 and 65%. The majority of Americans held in our jails this morning are presumed innocent pretrial defendants. The majority of them are going home when their number comes up on the list. What are we using jail for? Send a message? Teach a lesson? Make America a safer democracy? How are we making sure they stay in? We raise the price. Easiest part of the job. Easiest part of the lecture. These are data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics that my organization used to collect when they collected that those data in that project. And so we can see that these are felony bails, have gone up almost double, right? More than double, I'm sorry. You guys keep in mind the stupid chart with the lines showing crime and the line showing jail populations. This increase is not the result of increased crime. This increase is an overt move to incapacitate people. Maybe some of them we'd all want incapacitated. But what about all those guys who are getting credit for time served? Why aren't we keeping them in jail? So, Tim, I know you've been saying this for 150 years. Money bail inherently discriminates against those who don't have money, blah, blah, blah. What's the big deal? It's the best system we can come up with. It's been in place for over 100 years. It works pretty well. Sure, a couple of poor people take it on the chin, but you know what? They shouldn't have gotten in trouble. They know what the system is. That's the price. Keep coming back to the price, right? That's the price for getting in trouble. Sure, some of them may be innocent, but we know the vast majority have done something. So in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been an unprecedented focus on what happens at the front end of the justice system. And the John and Laura Arnold Foundation collected about 1.5 million cases nationally and extrapolated from those cases a number of findings that had never been possible previously. No one had invested the cash, and automation IT hadn't existed to the extent where any of this was possible. This was an unexpected finding, and it's profoundly important because it's not about poor people in jail. It's not about a single mom charged with shoplifting who shouldn't be in county. It's about all of us. Although, you've already figured out, I would argue with you that the single mom in county is about all of us. But it doesn't get much, she doesn't get much political traction, does she? If she did, she wouldn't be in county. We know from the Arnold study that when you take low-risk pretrial defendants, and for purposes of our conversation, low risk is defined as probably going to show up probably going to stay out of trouble. The risk of failing to appear is low. The risk of reoffending is low. I have a twin. His name is Tom. The only difference between Tim and Tom is Tom's invisible. You can't see him. Other than that, we are the same cat. We're charged with the same thing. We have the same criminal history. All the other characteristics you and yours collect about the human beings that go through your systems are the same. We are similarly situated, right? When you take Tim and Tom and you incarcerate Tim pre-trial and you release Tom, my likelihood of recidivism goes up dramatically when the only difference between us is I'm locked up. And it goes up dramatically even in as short a time period as 2 to 3 days. And if you hold me more than 10 days, you see it goes up significantly. And then you look at us 2 years later and you see that toxicity remains. So our efforts to keep our community safe, our efforts to maintain an orderly court process, turns out to have a poisonous effect with regard to public safety. Lock up low-risk people for just a couple of days pre-trial, they become higher-risk people. Indisputable. Now, lock up high-risk people, they stay high-risk. Has no measurable impact on them. But you take low-risk guys and you lock them up, you get more disorder and more crime as a result. And if that wasn't enough, so once upon a time, I worked in real courtrooms with real crooks and real newspaper reporters and real judges and real labor unions and all the wonderful things that you guys work with, real IT departments and the like. And in the early days of my career, if there were a career criminal appearing for first appearance or arraignment, depending on where you are and what you call it, and here's an individual charged with something nasty, no visible means of support, he's done state time, he's got nobody in the room that knows him or admits to knowing him. He's got no social network. He's a crook. We know he is. And the court sets a huge bond. That was a good day at the office. Everybody in the room knew. Yeah, the system's got some oddities to it, but it does a great job of honing in on the individuals who pose the most significant threat to us, and it takes care of them. Because we set 100,000, 500,000, whatever it is we set, we know there's no way that guy can make it, right? So also, as a result of the Arnold's work looking at 1.5 million cases, which actually was closer to 700,000 or 800,000 cases by the time they got rid of the stuff they couldn't use. Those most likely to fail to appear, most likely to reoffend, the highest risk defendant, got out more often than they were detained. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. They got out more often than they were detained. Tim, how can that be? The court said 250,000. That guy's never seen 250,000. They got out more often than they were detained. We just don't know it. Because we hear the dollar amount, we high five, they take the guy back to the jail. It's on to the next case, it's on to the next docket, right? Successful crooks have access to cash flow. Successful crooks are buds with other successful crooks. They have relationships with those who profit from the release of individuals. They go on time plans and credit plans and all kinds of wiggy stuff. Makes your head explode. What breaks your heart is that over half the time, the guys we want in, the guys who threaten us and ours, are getting out. So I have to do what you're going to translate as the tree-hugging liberal stuff. So why do people who are low risk become high risk after just a couple of days in jail? There are some really smart people in this room. I'm not one of them. But the smartest of us, we just don't know. We can guess. We can base our conjecture on our experience that most criminal defendants that I've seen in my life are from the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. If they work, they're often day laborers. If they're paying rent, it's often by the week, maybe the month. If they're breadwinners, they are literally bringing home bread that day. You take that individual out of that very fragile context and you put them in a cage for 2 or 3 days, their world has ended. No more work, if they were working. No more steady place to stay. Families probably scattered so they can survive. Who do those people have? The guy I'm locked up with. Right? And what do we get in return? What we get is this enormous cost because while I'm locked up for 2 or 3 days, my kids are on the path to foster care. The sheriff is going through the cost of evicting me, on and on and on and on. And as a bonus, I'm now likely to commit more crime than I would have been if you paid attention to my risk and made decisions accordingly. So this slide has been around since before I started. And we keep proving it over and over and over again. If you're held pre-trial, you're going to take it on the chin much harder than if you're released. Tim and Tom, okay? Tim's in, Tom's out. Tim has a 4 times greater likelihood of being sentenced to jail. Nah, how could that be? Easy. Go watch a disposition calendar. Guys who walk in from the street, how often are they offered jail time? And there are exceptions, of course. But I mean for the bread and butter, the mid to low level crime. The state normally offers jail time to those who are already in and offers something else to those that are out. 4 times greater likelihood of being sentenced to jail with my twin. If we both get jail, I'm going to spend 3 times longer there. I have a 3 times greater likelihood of going to prison, and my prison sentence is going to be twice as long. These are for the same offenses with individuals with the same characteristics. This stuff is seriously broken. It turns out this stupid bail decision that is made oftentimes by a piece of paper laminated on the bench that says grand theft, $5,000, has profound implications on public costs, public safety, and on justice. So many of you are involved in using, updating, validating risk assessments for all kinds of stuff. And the use of pretrial risk assessment, you have some of the pioneers of pretrial risk assessment here with you, is often pointed to as a significant reform. Risk assessments are scary stuff. Watch it. Be careful. Risk assessments are not a panacea. Risk assessment do not right the ship. Risk assessment are tools. I have my youngest daughter is 19, she's in college. Almost 3 years ago, she got her driver's permit. Be afraid. Now, I know you're thinking, didn't he say he was from Maryland? I don't know. Be very afraid. None of you are safe. How this girl got her driver's license. Because I'm the one who taught her to drive. I thought we were all safe, right? So somehow she passes. And I go to Geico or State Farm or Nationwide. And I say, hey, how much to insure my gift from heaven? They say, $23 billion. Really? How much to insure me? $1.57. But we're both drivers. We're both charged with grand theft. We're both burglars. Aren't we the same? Geico, State Farm, all those people don't even entertain the notion that we're the same. They know the level of risk that Joanne Patricia poses to each one of you and each one of the people you love is almost insurmountable. They also know for about another 15 months or so, until I shrink to the point where I'm looking over the windshield or the steering wheel and I start running over everything, I pose almost no risk. And they develop a business model accordingly. It's not communism. It's common sense, right? We've been doing it forever. We do it in health. I have certain risk characteristics. My healthcare provider says you need to take these steps in response to the risk to rebut or mitigate the risk. I worked at Homeland Security after 9/11. We came up with risk matrices with regard to travel and individuals who had characteristics that we thought, based on the data, were more likely to pose a threat than others. Car insurance, house insurance, it's been around forever, actuarial science. It's not new stuff. It's not voodoo stuff. Now, does it mean that Joanne Patricia will absolutely have an accident? Bad example, because this kid's going to have an accident. She may have had an accident while I'm here with you this morning. Doesn't mean I won't have an accident. No, it doesn't. It just means the likelihood is significantly less than the blonde. And it informs decision makers, as risk assessment does. It doesn't trump discretion. It informs discretion. And you guys, it scares the bejesus out of decision makers. This is stuff that no matter how much common sense, why is this guy even up here telling us the obvious? Because our decision makers nationally are really freaked out about this stuff because it's such a departure from grand theft, 2,500, right? That's safe. That was done for decades before I got on the bench. That's how I'm going to hand this off to the person that replaces me, right? And so for someone to start talking about risk, Judge, you knew about risk. What did you do about it? I didn't really understand it. Prosecutors don't get it. Defenders don't get it. And the rest of us tend to think of it as something that's going to save us. And so there's a lot of risk assessment being used in the pretrial domain. And I've been able to pay attention to some of it. And it's not unusual to see A jurisdiction implement a pretrial risk assessment, and the court to say, all right, Marcy, you appear to be medium risk, $5,000. And the rate of detention is the same. All the toxicity of pretrial incapacitation is the same. But I now have a new suit to wear. I have a risk assessment. I'm innovative. I'm modern. I'm cutting edge. I'm reformed. It's a tool. And unless you pick it up and use it, all it does is create the illusion that you've made things better. You have people here who understand this stuff far better than I. I suggest that you get together with them rather than sit there and listen to me on how risk assessments are developed and used. Let me say this in addition to these bullets. This is really important to understand. Risk assessment doesn't have a dog in the fight. Data don't care who goes in and who gets out. Data are data. It's up to policymakers, practitioners, to take those data and convert them into appropriate public policy. If you have a jail that is full of black and brown people that are relatively low risk, and you have streets where you have really scary people that are out, I would suggest you have the obligation, the responsibility to take data and see how it can inform your policies and your practices. So low, medium, and high risk. This is based on one tool that's gaining some popularity, the Arnold tool. I don't endorse the Arnold tool. I don't throw apples at the Arnold tool. You guys, I don't care. I don't have a tool. I'm not selling you a tool. I don't benefit or get hurt by which tools are used. Tools need to be validated. Tools need to be transparent. Tools need to be understandable. You cannot expect a decision maker to take a tool they don't understand and start to apply it as though it's credible. You have to be able to explain it. And a tool has to be part of an ongoing process where revalidation occurs on a continuing basis because stuff changes, right? So this is just one tool. The majority of pretrial arrestees are likely to come back to court and are likely, statistically, and are likely to stay out of trouble. At Geico, this is me. At Geico, down here, is my daughter, right? Straight up stuff. Son of Sam. Anybody old enough to know the Son of Sam case? Okay, notorious serial killer, right? Terrorized New York. Full-time employment, no criminal history, stable residence, no prior failure to appear. He's going to do awesome on a risk assessment. He is. That's why someone awake at the wheel has to use these things as a tool, not as a decision. Someone has to look at the facts of the case and go, whoa, I don't care about the risk. This is what I need to know in terms of making my decision, right? Does that make sense? There is no risk assessment that can anticipate every permeation of the human experience. So, as I said a while ago, This has been a song and dance that has sounded very liberal and left-wing and oriented in race and class for a long, long time. And you guys have politely listened and gone back to work and ignored it for a long, long time. And you're not alone. We're this room full of judges or prosecutors or, most especially, defenders. You would go, oh, I like the joke about wildest dreams. And that's pretty much the net effect of this work. Over the last 13 months, there have been 9 lawsuits filed challenging the constitutionality of money bail. And the lawsuits are based on an alleged violation of equal protection. The plaintiffs assert that if my invisible twin Tom gets out because he has money and I stay in, I am being treated inequitably simply because of my poverty. You heard a lot about poverty yesterday. So much of this stuff is about poverty. So much of this stuff is about trying to get back to equal justice under law. Because right now it isn't. So these guys have filed lawsuits 9 times. They have won 8 of them. The 9th was thrown out. They've been waiting for one to appeal. They're all U.S. federal court cases challenging state, local, and county practice. They're coming. They're not going away. And they're winning. And they're winning because they should. Because they're right when they say, we have one system of justice for the haves and another for the have-nots. Who doesn't know that? Of course. That's always been the case. They're challenging the legality of that fact. And as I say, they're winning. And they're getting some pretty unlikely allies, like the U.S. Department of Justice, who filed this in a statement of interest in a case out of Georgia about 6 months ago. Bad public policy, violation of equal protection. Public opinion. Tim, you're a good guy, like your jokes, knew you win. But you got to understand, it's really different where I work. We're very conservative in my community. We're very law and order oriented. I've never worked in a jurisdiction that got up and said, Timbo, we're really liberal here. I've worked in Berkeley, and they told me, we're very conservative here when it comes to crime. True story. And you know what they are, because you should be. That's very serious stuff. It shouldn't be subject to fad or prevailing mood. People's property, their very well-being is at stake. Over the last 6 years, for the first time in history, we got support where I work to do national opinion polling, and we got to ask people about all this crazy stuff we call pretrial justice. Results were astonishing, really breathtaking. It reminds me of the results of drug court. Vicki mentioned that I was once upon a time drug court. So after we negotiated drug court in Miami, I was the chump that was assigned to go around to the community and explain to them what it was we were going to do. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that at this time, this is during the Scarface era of South Florida, right? wheelbarrows of cash, cocaine literally falling from the sky and hitting people over the head and hurting them. My short version of describing the drug situation in South Florida in the 80s is simply this. If you were charged with possession of under 5 kilos of cocaine in South Florida, that was a personal use case. Because they had so many cases in excess of them. And when the new U.S. attorney was appointed and he had his first press conference and he said, this 5 kilo standard is ridiculous, we all sat up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and he said, we're making it 7.5. So in the middle of the war on drugs, in the middle of a town that lives by tourism, people being shot in the street, all the crazy nonsense of South Florida in the 80s, you were either for interdiction or you were against it. Treatment was not part of the conversation. Prevention was not part of the conversation. It was a loyalty test. Are you for intervention? Are you for sealing the borders? Are you for swift and certain punishment or not? That was the dialogue. Local business leaders banded together publicly and said, government doesn't know what the hell it's doing. And we are going to the legislature and proposing packages of legislation to fix these people because they don't know how to govern. Great time, great place to work. And out of all of that morass, we said, let's do a drug court. Okay? And so I went around town for 6 months and talked to any group of citizens. Crime Watch, condo association, school crossing guard association. Didn't matter who it was. If there were more than 5 people, I was doing a show. Right? And I would say, we're going to take people who get arrested, and if they're drug involved, we're going to give them the opportunity to get treatment, and then once they start treatment, we're going to stay with them until they get it right. And if they get it right, we'll do something with the case and push them on their way. And across the board, the public would say, what are you doing now? Oh, well, now we arrest them and we keep them locked up until their court date, and then when they plead guilty, we sentence them to more time, and then when they get out, they get high and they get arrested, and then we do it again. Why would you do that? And the only answer I ever had for him was, we thought that's what you wanted us to do. We thought you were conservative on these issues. We thought you were focused on law and order. And they were. We were just wrong in understanding what that meant. The public wants us to make sense. The public wants us to be successful. The public wants us to operate within the confines of the law transparently and effectively. The last public opinion polling we did, we asked, do you think that the rich get a better shake than the poor? You can see, not surprisingly, they know what we know. Do you support issuing citations for low-level crimes rather than bringing people to jail? 76% favor or strongly favor. Would you rather use risk and effective responses to risk or the posting of dollars? 74% in favor of risk, 75 Democrats, 74 independents, 76 Republicans, 74% of the whites, 75%, and 83% of Latinos. The polling organization, the first time we did this, were dumbfounded that the most common answer wasn't, I don't know. Because in an issue as esoteric as this, in polling scenarios, the public normally says, I agree, I don't agree, I don't know, and they go to I don't know. Very few said I don't know. When posed with, do you want people to stay in jail or go home depending on how much money they can raise, or do you want risk to determine that? Hands down, they want risk. This last polling is the first time we've been able to break it down by ethnicity and political alignment. But that's a pretty even line, ain't it? Right? Not a whole lot of issues in our society that are going to get a response. Yet I would say that most of us would think this is kind of left-wing stuff that my constituents or my communities or my stakeholders, my media, are going to be up in arms about. Bumper stickers. Oops. Anybody know what that is?
IACP,
And what is IACP?
International Association of Chiefs of Police.
I'm up to my armpits in cops. I'm not an up to my armpits in cops kind of guy, as you might have figured out, right? I'm sweating like a pig because every room I work is full of cops. And they love me. And I love them. Because cops get it. Cops understand. Cops want everybody in jail. Of course they do. No, they don't. They want the right people in jail. And they see firsthand the abject failure that results from our attempts to keep the right people in jail. I love doing presentations with chiefs because they have really awesome uniforms. Much more awesome than I ever had. And I've been in uniform. And they have a level of credibility that none of us have. One of the first public opinion polling, the first public opinion polling we did, was to ask the public, who do you trust to talk to you about criminal justice stuff? Number one choice, chief of police. When we would have focus groups and say, you know, there's some bad cops, they'd go, yeah, they're bad apples in every barrel. What about judges? Yeah, not as much as chiefs. How about DAs? Yeah, not as much as chiefs. So I go see if I can dance with chiefs. And my God, they talked my ears off. They had examples of specific cases where Bill gets arrested, Bill gets a bail, Bill commits burglaries to make his payments to his bondsman. They have the payment schedule, they have the complaints of the burglary, they got Bill. And they're saying, what's everybody doing? We're arresting Bill over and over and over. His bond goes higher and higher and higher each time, and he keeps getting out because he can generate the money to do so. Of course, from your community is not only the Conference of State Court Administrators, but the Conference of Chief Justices. The Conference of Chief Justices turns out to be a pretty powerful group. They have called for reform. Reform is occurring statewide in a growing number of states. Reform as includes the dispassionate assessment of risk and the pragmatic response to risk once it's been identified. Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, Association of Counties, ABA, Public Defenders, DOJ, MOUSE. This thing's totally out of date because I can't fit it anymore on here. This has become a nonpartisan groundswell of support. In my wildest dreams, I could never imagine that Newt Gingrich would call for bail reform. In my wildest dreams, I'd never imagine I would walk into a room full of chief justices And know most of them? Because most of them are up to their neck working on statewide bail reform. New Jersey just reformed its state legislation. New Jersey is a right to bail state. They amended their constitution to allow for preventive detention. This stuff does work when you pay attention to it. This is a display of one risk assessment tool similar to others and shows you the breakdown in risk category and the apportionment. Washington, D.C., my hometown. They haven't used money in Washington in over 25 years. Washington has real crime. Hasn't burnt down yet. They got crooks, they got thugs, they got guns, they got gangs, they got drugs, they got domestic violence and DUI, just like you do. Washington has not used money bond in over 25 years. The use of money bond is not illegal in Washington. They just don't use it. What, are they crazy? No, they actually looked and saw. The only thing that money does is separate those who have it from those who don't have it. They also have preventive detention to respond to the unmanageably dangerous defendant. 80% of everybody's released first day. By released, I mean released, out, gone, goodbye, without paying money. Some are supervised, some are not, depending on their risk level. 15% are held without bail. They go to a preventive detention hearing within 3 days. Half of them, half of the 15%, are subsequently released at that hearing. 5% have money bond. It's because of a quirk in the DC legislation regarding credit for time served. Unless you're being held on a money bond when you're on a detainer or hold from another jurisdiction or agency, you can't get credit for time served. So they use that as an administrative function rather than actual bond. 88% stay out of trouble, 88% come back to court. Legislatively, this stuff isn't going to change out of the goodness of people's hearts. We've seen that. It's either going to change by virtue of strong court rule or effective legislation. This stuff's really cool. This is the work, right? This is all the result of culture. I've been getting locked up in your towns for 70 years, and you've been keeping me in jail for 70 years based on an offense type and background characteristics, and now here's some crossword puzzle that says I'm safe. That's hard stuff to overcome. And even when you implement risk and risk assessment, the culture drags you back. I look at what's happened to drug courts. No offense to those of you that are involved in wonderful, high-functioning, efficient drug courts. There's a bunch out there that just scare the heck out of you. And I can't see on the surface any relationship between the original or initial idea of getting people clean and sober and reducing threat to public safety and what has become a dare and a one-size-fits-all. The very things that at its inception drug courts sought to override because culture is so strong. You are the culture of those systems. You are a leader in those buildings, in those communities, by virtue of your attendance here, in your profession. We have seen stuff change in our lifetime. It can change. It will change if you want it. You have to be relentless. You have to have data. And you have to be able to expose that despite the best intentions and sincere belief that things are going pretty well, that it's unconscionable for us to allow them to continue. We have a lot lined up on the side of reform, but we don't have what we need unless we have you as well. I thank you for your work, and I thank you for your attention this morning.
Well, I don't know about you all, but those stats are alarming and staggering, and there's a lot of work to be done from this presentation and the one we heard yesterday. So thank you, Tim, for those great words. Okay, today our breakouts will start at 10:15, so we have a 15-minute break, and don't forget to join us back here at 3 for the closing plenary session. Thank you.